Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. God won't give you more than you can handle is a common and oft-repeated sentiment in Christian circles, from social media posts to one-on-one encounters. It's such a popular statement that many have been inadvertently come to believe it is scriptural. In his new book, More Than You Can Handle, pastor, author, and blogger Nate Pyle reminds readers of a hard truth. God actually does give his children more than they can be handled alone, thus inviting them to rely on him and his strength to see them through overwhelming times. All people, Christians included, face times of suffering. Skillfully weaving together his own history, the stories of others, and a powerful look at the life of Jesus, Nate delivers a relevant and fresh approach that will encourage readers by the hope only God can give, especially in tumultuous and desperate times. In More Than You Can Handle, Nate is honest about his own life and suffering he, a Christian, has encountered. While not claiming his suffering is worse than anyone else's, he shows from Scripture that God's people are promised more than they can bear with their own strength, which is actually a constant and loving invitation for God's children to rely on him supernaturally. From he and his wife's heartbreaking struggle with infertility, to navigating the adoption process, to losing a ministry position, Nate has been given more than he can bear alone, and learned from it that once we stop pretending we can handle life on our own, we experience true help from the God of redemption. He's the husband to Sarah, dad to Luke, Evelyn, and Wesley, and he serves as pastor of Christ Community Church in Fishers, Indiana. He's the author of Man Enough, How Jesus Redefines Manhood, and blogs regularly at NatePyle, Pyle.com. His work has been featured at Sojourners.com, The Huffington Post, Christ and Pop Culture, and various other publications. Look for him at NatePyle79 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Here to discuss his new book, More Than You Can Handle, When Life's Overwhelming Pain Meets God's Overcoming Grace, is Nate Pyle. Nate, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Having me on. It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. I've navigated the same journey. My daughter, 30, is adopted. I lost a ministry position due to a betrayal, the most crushing blow of my life. To see at 62 years old, the rug pulled out from under me for a congregation that I planted. And,
oh, wow.
And so I know from where you speak, and my daughter now is 30, adopted her at birth, and she's carrying, tomorrow will be 19 weeks, carrying my first grandchild. So,
oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, very, very exciting time. So I relate to you on a very personal level of what we would consider to be my spirit recognizes your spirit because of your experiences. But take us back to little Nate. You know, we know your journey because you chronicle your journey through your blogs, through your writing. But let's go back to the early formative years. You know, the Word of God says we're overcomers by the word of our testimony and the blood of the Lamb. And I love to give my guests the opportunity to give their testimony because it is what sets us apart from all the rest of the world that are not believing.
Yeah. So we go all the way back. I had the privilege of growing up in a Christian home. So my family comes from a long line of Dutch reformers, and so grew up in a Dutch Reformed church, which is now called the Reformed Church in America, is the denomination. And so grew up there and had a very typical experience in a Dutch Reformed church. We went to church twice on Sunday. So you went Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, or Sunday evening. You'd have Sunday school after church on Sunday morning. Monday nights we had what they called cadets, which was like Boy Scouts for Christians, and then on Wednesday we would have catechism. So we would learn all the Heidelberg Catechism and various other Bible studies and that sort of stuff. So I had a very positive experience with the church growing up, and was introduced to the faith and handed the faith down from my parents. Now, that said, I think there has to become a point where you take the faith that you've been given as a kid from your family when you've grown up in a church, and then make it your own. I think in the Christian world, we love the testimonies of which somebody has strayed far from God, or maybe has never been introduced to Jesus, and then they have a transformative, powerful conversion story. But I think it's equally amazing when someone who's grown up in the faith says, this is going to be my own my own faith. And frankly, I want my kids to have that testimony of growing up in the church and then it becoming their own faith. So for me, that happened through Young Life while I was in high school. So Young Life is a parachurch organization that reaches out to high school students. And I got connected with a couple of students who were going to Young Life, went to what they call club, which happens during the weekdays or the week evenings at somebody's house. And there I met a leader. His name's Dan Dobler. And he took me under his wing and just became my friend and started showing up at events at school and supporting me, taught me how to play the guitar. And in the midst of that, kept showing me the love of Jesus. They took me to a Young Life camp. And even though I had heard the gospel story, really the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, for the first time, like I had heard it, but then I heard it almost what Job says at the end of Job. I have heard of you, but now I've seen you. And I had that kind of experience at that camp. And so that's when my faith became my own. And in our tradition, they baptize infants. And so then when I was 18, I stood before the board of elders at our church and professed my faith in Jesus Christ and that he would be my Lord and Savior. I'd follow him. So that's really where I came from and then how I came to faith. And then God has continued to woo me and draw me closer to him in more intimacy and to eventually leading me into ministry. I don't know if you want that whole experience, but yeah, there's a lot in there too.
So everything's been perfect. This has been a smooth, easy ride. You grew up in the church. My goodness, it sounds almost like a Hallmark Channel story.
It's very idyllic and suburban, isn't it?
It is. It is. But beneath all that, there's a young man.
Yeah.
And a young man who has questions and struggles and is facing life through the lens of a young man and wondering what's going on and what's happening. And although we have this wonderful, incredible relationship with God, we then begin to develop relationships with others. And a lot of times the vertical can be all shored up and nice and tidy, but the horizontal becomes a little bit messy, and we begin to find out that the realities of living as a believer and loving as a believer and experiencing life as a believer is sometimes got not just potholes but sinkholes and craters and crevices. So as you then went on to answer the call, when did the call come for you that you felt that you were going to continue down a path in ministry?
Yeah, that really started for me the summer before my senior year of college. My senior year of college, that summer. In college, I was pre-med, so my major is actually in chemistry, and I spent a lot of time in biology and all of the physical sciences preparing myself for med school. But my junior year, my roommate we were having a conversation in the college cafeteria, and he said, you're not going to be a doctor, Nate. I hope you realize you're going into ministry. And I said, no, Derek, you are absolutely wrong. And we actually got into an argument. I was kind of upset that he was not supportive of me and was trying to tell me a different plan for my life. And I thought that was born out of his desires and not him truly knowing and seeing me. But God actually used that conversation to begin really causing me to question, like, am I really called to become a doctor? And so I actually took the medical admissions test and was filling out my applications for med school. And what you have to do, they have it was a form online, and there was one side where I listed all my extracurricular activities that I was involved in while I was in college. And so there was intramural sports and those types of things, but there was leading Bible studies and leading mission trips and being on staff with Young Life and speaking in chapel. And then on the other side, it was list all your extracurricular activities as it pertains to medicine. And it was job shadow surgeon one time, one day. And I just sat there and I looked at the screen with those things side by side, and I went, oh, unbeknownst to me, I have not been preparing to go into medicine. God has been preparing me to go into ministry. And so, yeah, I powered down the computers at that point, never went back, and started to pursue what it would look like for me to go into ministry, and ended up going on staff as a youth pastor, and then starting some seminary classes. And so for me, even getting into ministry, you talk about how kind of had this idyllic upbringing, and obviously it wasn't, but we can kind of, in many ways it was. My call to ministry really began this point in which I struggle with God, struggling against my own desires, my own wishes for my life. And so as time has gone on, those struggles have only increased as I come more into contact with the brokenness in the world and my own brokenness within inside of me. And then just some of the realities of a world that is not as it should be.
Where and when did you meet Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah and I met in college, my senior year, her junior year of college. So we went to Hope College, and we met each other, which is a story of a little bit of brokenness as well. I was actually engaged to be married to another girl, and that relationship had a lot of problems and was not healthy for a number of reasons. And again, my college roommate sat me down and actually at one point said, "Nate, if this wedding continues, like, we don't think that we can be a part of it." That one of them was going to stand up and a couple were going to be ushers, and they actually said, we don't think we can be a part of it. And again, that was the point at which that relationship began to, we began to see it more clearly for what it was. And we ended up breaking that off. And then a couple months later, some friends, I think, who felt bad for me that now all of a sudden I had gone through this experience and didn't have anything to do on a Friday night, they invited me along to a birthday party for one of them. And that's where I met Sarah. And so, yeah, from that on.
Very, very interesting that you have this old life and old vision of being a doctor. And I'm sure that this bride-to-be thought she was getting ready to marry a pre-med doctor.
Yep.
And all of a sudden now you're getting this tug in a completely different direction. And as far as being equally yoked, God knew very clearly and sent you as many messengers as he possibly could to make it very clear to you till finally it says, okay, just like on the screen, she's not a ministry. If I'm connected to her, that's not a ministry partner, and God orchestrated it. So in that pain,
yeah,
in all that
pain and the breaking of that relationship was absolutely a grace of God. I cannot imagine what my life would look like right now had that happened, had we gone through that marriage. And so, yeah, it was painful. It was hard. I was very hurt at the time by my roommates, but now I have thanked them multiple times because that was the grace of God.
It's interesting how God will send people into our lives, and depending on our spiritual condition as to whether or not we're truly receptive to hearing the call. And the call becomes a clarion call when we begin to tune our ears to it. There's all kinds of cacophony of noises in the world, and why can one person say, can you hear that? Can you hear? And you say, no, what are you talking about? And they describe it, and you say, no, but if you stop and you quiet everything down and you incline your ear to try to hear what they hear, you can actually cut through all the noise and get to and say, yes, now I can hear it. We have that ability to filter and to focus. And so God used these wonderful people in your life to speak into you. And that's exactly the way God speaks into you, by delivering a message that you don't want to hear at a time you don't want to hear it, with words that are very uncomfortable, life-changing, and heartbreaking sometimes, but they happen to be, sometimes that's the test of truth if it's presented in love, and it's truly as a messenger of God. So this whole journey, going into youth ministry, Sarah's along for the ride with not a pre-med student now, she's along for a life in ministry. And so you come on staff at a church.
Yep.
And
yeah, I'm on staff with the church, and I was on staff for about 4.5 years total. And it was a wonderful. The first year and a half were wonderful. The senior pastor of the church and the associate pastor that I worked directly underneath. Really became great friends, and am still friends, particularly with the associate pastor. But then after being there for about a year and a half, the senior pastor took a call to become the executive director of a missions organization that he had already been highly involved with. And then about 6 months later, the associate pastor took a call to become a senior pastor at another church. And that left the church with a little bit of a vacuum there, as now all of a sudden the senior pastor and the associate pastor are gone, which was in some ways it was really, really difficult. But for me as a at the time 24, 25-year-old, it was exciting because now all of a sudden I got to wear a lot of different hats. I was, chairing the Christian Education Council. I was preaching every 6 weeks. I was helping lead liturgy. We had more of a more liturgical, responsive type worship service, and so I was leading liturgy almost every week. I was going to seminary classes. I was serving on the worship council as well, doing all my youth ministry stuff. I mean, I was just doing a lot of things at the church, which was in some ways really gratifying, right? And it boosted my ego, and that was part of the problem. So when they hired in a new senior pastor, between my youthful arrogance and us also having very different philosophies of ministry, we had very different understandings of what it looked like and what our relationship would look like and how I should be conducting myself as a youth pastor. It eventually ended up in me being let go from the church, which was extremely painful. So I'd been there for about 4.5 years, and at that point, it really had to evaluate whether or not God was truly calling me into ministry. It felt like if I couldn't survive at this church, in these circumstances, like, is that a reflection of me? Does that mean I'm disqualified from ministry? Does that mean that my time has kind of come to an end? And what does it look like in the future? And what kind of ministry is God calling me to? So that was a very disorienting year and a half after that, as I tried to discern what God was wanting me to learn, but then where he was calling me as well.
So as you navigated that journey and you encounter for yourself whether or not God has given you more than you can handle, and you become questioning, which is our go-to strategy. Is what this person is saying about me, is this really a true commentary and narrative on I'm not fit for ministry, I should be looking for something else. And now I'm looking at this person. Are they speaking their truth? Are they speaking God's truth? Are they speaking out of some different place that I'm just not familiar with? And you begin to struggle with that dark night of the soul, the troubling time, what we would call Jacob's troubles, and this wrestling with God, and all of these things. So how did you navigate your way out of that?
Yeah, you talk about the wrestle and the struggle. One of the things that, when I was let go from the church, they offered me a 1-month severance, and part of that severance was $1,000 towards career counseling, which is what really sent me into the spiral of like, okay, if they're offering me career counseling, they're saying that they don't think I should be in ministry. Like, that's what was going on there. And for a number of reasons, I actually ended up turning down the whole severance package. And that's a whole nother story that I don't need to get into. But you say that, like, that really did lead me into the dark night of the soul. And so part of the way that I navigated that was, one, by the grace of families and youth who had been at the church, who came around me, supported me, spoke words of affirmation about my ministry and my time there. Two, I had been enrolled in seminary, and so I trusted the seminary process and happened to be taking a number of courses on what does it mean to be a pastor as a person, what does it mean to find your vocation, and all of that. And so I trusted that process and stayed in my seminary classes, using that as an opportunity to discern and to listen to those voices of my professors and other church leaders about what they had to say to me about my call to ministry. And then a huge proponent of that was my family, in particular my wife Sarah, and what did she see and what did she believe and what was she hearing from God? Because for me in my life, I mean, whether it was, me being a pre-med to ministry or the engagement that got broken off, the voice that is the hardest for me to get beyond is my own voice. And I've needed people to speak into my life and to help me cut through my voice so I can hear the voice of God. And so I really relied on a lot of folks like that to help me discern what was true, what was not true, what was, voices of shame and condemnation, which are never coming from the voice of God.
You comment this, it's interesting that your wife's name is Sarah, because these are the same challenges that Abraham himself faced as he was being called and tested and failed in a number of tests. There's so many face-to-face encounters with God, visitations from God in the natural, that I think we chronicle almost 10 different visitations from God. And here's this man who fails repeatedly in his test. His witness is corrupted. He has non-believers convicting him of his bad behavior. How can this be the patriarch of my people, of Judaism, the seed line, the promised seed line through Isaac and Jacob to bring us the Messiah, to be a part and parcel to those that will call for his return. Such a heavy mantle for such a fragile character, strength of character, and but ultimately passes the final exam, which is the most severe of all exams. You talk about faith as not certainty. Treating faith as certainty leaves us anxious and exhausted in our pursuit to prove we have enough faith. Those words really jumped off the page in a particular way, because we talk about faith being certain. You have to, 2 Peter 3:15, have a ready answer for the hope. It's this faith that Jesus is going to return, and that that this is your worst life now, not your best life now, and that there's something waiting for you much greater on the other side of this, and then in the resurrection, and then in the eternal life which comes in the millennial, after the millennial reign and the new heaven and the new earth and all that. And that's so far out there that it really has to be kind of a certain uncertainty, kind of the Jarius. I believe you, Lord, but forgive my unbelief. I saw my daughter asleep, dead. I left the house. She wasn't here anymore. Right. And I come to you and you tell me, go home, she's fine. And okay, yes, Lord, I certainly believe you, but come on, man. Seriously? Okay, I believe you, but I'm going to go back home. And we do walk by sight. We don't walk by faith. We're admonished to walk by faith and not to walk by sight. But can you do that 24 hours a day? Is this something that is does God truly expect us? I mean, Paul says, I do what I ought not to do, and what I should do, I don't do. And here's one of the greatest writers, biggest contributors to the New Testament and to the story in our faith and how to apply life in the Lord. And he's not even lining up with what he's supposed to be doing 24/7.
Yeah, I mean, there's even the point at 2 Corinthians, I think it's in the very first chapter there, in the first couple of verses of the chapter, when he's talking about the trials that they've had to endure. And he said, we've had to endure so many trials that we despaired of life itself, right? And so that you're like, well, Paul, shouldn't you be certain of the hope that is coming? Shouldn't you be and yet he struggles, he wrestles. There is a hope that Paul is absolutely certain of, that gives him the ability to rejoice in the midst of being imprisoned, that teaches him to be content no matter what situation he's facing. And yet he's also got this this internal struggle of some of these promises have not yet been realized. So we're in the already, but the not yet. God has promised them, and we've gotten a foretaste of them, but their fulfillment isn't here yet. And that's tiring. That can be exhausting, and it does raise up questions of God, where are you? What are you doing? How long, O Lord? To pick up on the words of the psalmist. And so, it really is, faith. Faith is something that, like you said, we're both certain of it and we're not certain of it. We for me, the way I often describe this is I want everything to be true. When we talk about resurrection and reconciliation, the restoration of all things and the new creation, I want all of those absolutely to be true. And so I cling to those. But sometimes what I look out in the world and what I'm absolutely certain of is death is still real, evil still exists, injustice is still present. Like, I'm absolutely certain of that. And I desperately want the idea of grace and love that's at the center of the universe to be true. And so I hold on to that with a certain level of certainty in the midst of my uncertainty. Like, it kind of goes both ways, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. You happen to hit on Psalm 13, which was, for me, driving to preach. I would play it. I had a musical rendition of it, and I would play it, and I would weep. And I was in this horrible, wretched situation, and it was a 22-minute drive from my home to the synagogue that I preached at, the Messianic synagogue that I founded. And the moment I'd back out of the driveway, I would turn it on. It was on repeat. And I would just cry out, how long, O Lord, will you be silent? How long? Look on me and answer, O God, my Father.
Yeah.
And so that my enemy doesn't see me fall. Because I've got to get in the pulpit, and I know that there's a stirring, and I've got to get up there and I've got to preach. And so I would hit the BP station, which was at the corner where I made the left turn on the long drive down. That was kind of like my signal to wipe my eyes, anoint my face with oil, anoint my beard with oil, and take the drive in and make sure that I was now as spirit-filled as I could possibly be to endure, to bring his message forward, and almost dealing with this sense that I know you've struggled with as well, is, are we a fraud? Are we real? I have doubt, and yet I'm preaching this convincing argument. I'm going through my own struggles and my own crisis of faith in this one particular area, but I've got to be up there being bold. Am I a fraud?
Yep. And I think the other important piece, and this will tie into that, the other important piece about certainty and having a faith that is faith and not certainty is the moment we say, I'm absolutely certain that this is who God is and this is how God acts. That anytime those are different, anytime we've got a God, we've crafted some portion of God's character or how God is going to act, we've crafted that in our image, but we say we're absolutely certain of it, then we can't ever have that changed. We can't ever be corrected so that we come into a fuller understanding of who God is. And so, if we say we're absolutely certain that God requires me as an individual to handle whatever situation it is, then we never actually create space to find the God who says, no, I'm going to meet you in your struggle and I'm going to help you. You can be weak and then I'll be strong. Right. And then I think, as you were talking about, you getting to the place where you can cry out, how long, O Lord, and then still endure. Like, if you have this openness, like, I believe in you, God, but I'm not 100% certain of how you're going to move in this situation. I'm not 100% certain of who you are. Like, in those moments of suffering and difficulty, we actually can be exposed to more of who God is and come to a greater understanding. But that only comes if we're willing to say, like, there are some things that I absolutely believe, but I'm not certain I know everything. I'm not certain that I've wrapped my finite mind around the infinite goodness of God.
Well, I completely agree with you. We're talking with Nate Pyle, author of the new book, More Than You Can Handle, When Life's Overwhelming Pain Meets God's Overcoming Grace. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig further into the incredible message contained in these pages with Nate Pyle. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English, and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Nate Pyle, author of More Than You Can Handle When Life's Overwhelming Pain Meets God's Overcoming Grace. Nate, welcome back to the program.
Thanks. Good to be back.
Nate, I tell people all the time that if you can't find yourself in the Bible, and you cannot connect with the character in the Bible, then you've never read the Bible. During these seasons of your life, from the difficulty in leaving one congregation and then going and finding your true call, which is the senior pastor of the church that you're in now, through the struggle with infertility and the process of adoption, which I have been through, and I'll be the one to say it. It is invasive, It is expensive. It is nothing like just conceiving a child and bringing it into this world. You have FBI background checks. You have local background checks. They interview friends, family. They come into your home to examine the quality of your life. They ask people and they check up on you, and you have to be able, and then you have classes you have to go to for parenting. Then mine was in California. Then there has to be an adoption agency and an attorney involved, and then there's the court system and the social services system and the checking on you and making sure that you're doing things right. Then there's the termination of rights and then the final court hearing. And in our case, we were 6 months delayed because they couldn't find the father, because the mother had lied about who the father was. So we were trying to find somebody that didn't exist. Finally, through petition, we were able to do a termination of rights. And so it took us 9 months from the time we brought Amanda home to the time her adoption was final, as opposed to the typical 3-month process. So very, very long and enduring, very difficult. So on top of the disappointment of both you and your wife, and you not being able to relate to your wife's personal struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's just be very honest. So when we're talking about infertility, there is a distinct difference between what's happening in the mind of the woman and in the body of the woman versus the man, right? I'm a part of the process, but very much outside of it. And for her, as I talk about this a little bit in the book, is it's happening in her body. And so as we went through infertility, and at one point, and I talk about this early in the book, is we had an ectopic pregnancy, which means that the embryo doesn't get implanted into the uterus, right, but is in the fallopian tubes and is not viable. I mean, that's happening in her body. And she actually at one point apologized to me. I'm so sorry that I'm putting you through this. And I'm like, baby, you're not putting me through anything. And she goes, yeah, but my body is the one that's not working right. And yeah, but you don't have any control. So she's got those kinds of emotions. I've got the other kind of emotions where I'm the outsider looking in. I still have the hopes and the dreams and the prayers, but it's now like it's almost like it's a problem out there. And I'm a kind of guy where if there's a problem, I want to try to fix that, right? So if my dishwasher breaks, I'm hopping on YouTube and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it. But in this situation, there's nothing that I can do. In fact, there was even nothing that we did the test and the doctors are like, we don't know why this isn't happening for you all. It should be according to what we know. And so it was very, very difficult. And to have that be just another thing, right? It just got there. There's all the stuff that happened in college with the changing of my career path, the ending of that one engagement, getting married, then you're on to getting let go from a ministry position, wondering, it felt like one thing after another. It's not in the time frame of Job, right, where Job gets it all within a matter of hours and days, but it was it just kept piling up. And so in a lot of ways, I identified with Job. There's one particular line in Job chapter 30 where he says, I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but it's pretty close to the original. He says, I stand here and all you do is look at me. Mm-hmm. And I think that line, I felt that sometimes where I was praying that to God, like, God, it feels like my prayers are just hitting the ceiling. It feels like you hear and you can see all of this because you're omniscient, but it doesn't seem like you're responding. It doesn't seem like you're stepping in. So you see me, but all you do is look at me. So I really identified with Job, and in particular, that sentiment.
Well, it also sounds like that you grabbed a hold of the concept of lament.
Yes.
And this is something that the average believer does not understand. And there's all kinds of theologies built around this, but they're not actually what the Bible is all about. This is the cry of the soul yearning for God to answer, to step in and do what I want him to do. I'm carrying this burden, the burden's too great to bear, and in my utterances and groanings, I'm crying out to God, and he knows what I need. He knows what my prayer is. I don't know what to pray. I just know that this is more than I can possibly handle. And my heart is breaking. My soul, I'm angry. I'm hurt, I'm frustrated, I'm tired, I don't know where you are, I don't know what you're doing, and I want out of this. I just want out of this. And God, in this lament, is saying to you, just ask me the right question. Ask me the right question. I'm waiting for you to ask me the right question. And finally, the right question is, Lord, what do you want me to get out of this? Not, Lord, how can I get out of this? But what is there in this that you want me to learn, to understand, to grab a hold of? Because you have something so great that you are entrusting me with this what on the surface looks horrible, terrible, devastating, troubling, but yet you trust me to write a book to reach millions of people, I pray, with the concept that says that in my time of trouble, you're entrusting me to take the message of what I learned in this difficult time. You trust me? You trust me? Don't trust me so much.
Yeah. Do you really see who I am, God? Like, are you sure you want to do this? Right. Yeah.
Exactly. But when we and you did that, you turned that corner and you began to see that independence is two words. It's not one word.
Right.
And when we come to that understanding, and you tell it so eloquently in a book, I want you to talk about your lament and what it was that when you hit a turning point, what that revelation for you was. Because revelation, listen, I tell people, you want revelation, go get your own. You go spend time in the Word. You go spend time. Listen, my revelation, your revelation are going to be completely different in the same set of circumstances, in the same situation. We may come full circle 20 years later and come back and meet and say, yeah, I can relate to that. But in that moment, when you finally have that revelation, what was that for you in the work? Because it's at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll start with a story. Soon after the ectopic pregnancy, and we confirmed that, which was a process because my wife and I, with our values, the doctors wanted us to terminate the pregnancy long before they were convinced that it was just based on what we're seeing, we should end this for the safety of my wife. And we were like, we can't do this on a guess. Like, we have to be 100% sure that this is. But a few days after that, I was walking through the woods and was trying to clear my mind of everything that happened and just get away from the situation. And I was walking through the woods and I came to this point, I just stopped. And I looked at the sky and I said, your word tells us that you knit us together in our mother's womb. And this child didn't even make it into the womb. That's on you. And I didn't, the sounds of the woods went on normal, and I didn't hear a voice from God or anything like that. But what I simply felt was a presence. Like I felt like it was okay to say that. It was okay to be angry. It was okay to quote God's scripture back to him and say, this thing here, I don't see it yet. It's not realized in my life. And it bore a kind of intimacy that was new for me, an intimacy that was all of who I am, and then allowed God to meet me with all of who he is. It really is sort of that move from thinking we have these conceptions of who God is to getting to know God. It's the move that Job describes when he says, I've heard of you, but now I see you. And that was what was so rich for me, and it's something that I'm still learning. And what to go from that place over the next really a year and a half that the book details, it was this coming to this understanding that God doesn't save us from the trials, but often saves us through the trials, right? We look at Job comes to a deeper intimacy with God by going through the trials and going through these moments where he has to be brutally honest. We see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are saved through the furnace. God could have saved them from the furnace, but he doesn't. He saves them through the furnace. And then on to Jesus, that Jesus has to die in order for resurrection, and that's also true for us. And so I came to this place where recognizing that much of my life had been lived trying to follow God and obey commands and be a good Christian in order to be saved from trials. But what instead I've come to learn is that God will save us through trials, and in that we get to this place of deeper intimacy and understanding of the presence of God with us no matter what we're facing.
You know, that's a realization that you can shake your fist at God, and He is perfectly fine with that. I'm on strike. I'm boycotting. I'm angry. I'll show you. I'm not going to read my Bible for a week. I'm not going to talk to you. But that God's not limited by our circumstance. Oftentimes people allow their circumstance to define them and define their relationship with God. But throughout the Bible and throughout your book, there is a consistent theme, and that is your victory is in your response. It's not in your circumstances. It's in your response.
Yeah. What I really wanted to do with this book is both model and in that modeling give people permission to go to God and just to be completely honest. I think what can happen is when we face difficult situations and how God responds or how we see God or perceive God to be responding, when that doesn't match up with our expectations, we turn away and we make the decision God doesn't care or God's not there. God is aloof somewhere. What I want to encourage people to do is to actually take everything that they can into the space of that relationship with God, which includes the disappointments, the hurts, the frustrations, the emotions, the promises that they read in Scripture that maybe are not yet fulfilled. Like, God, you promise healing, but I'm still sick. God, you promise reconciliation, but I'm still experiencing betrayal in my relationships. To take that and to bring that before God so that God can both be like a father who knows his children, and two, can maybe begin to say, well, actually, I am working in these areas. It's just in a different way than you expect, or where God just maybe exposes you to a level of grace through the body of Christ in a new way, or God makes himself present in a way that that is completely new and wonderful. So,
it's really quite interesting to see this process of really believing that God is there even when you don't feel it, even when you can't see it. And what's so fascinating is to watch throughout the Bible that if God says he's going to do something, you are absolutely 100% relieved of any responsibility for the performance of God in that circumstance.
Yes.
He gave Joseph the dream. Joseph wasn't responsible for fulfilling the dream. God gave him the dream. God's responsible for fulfilling the dream. It took 25 years from the time he gave him the dream to the time that the dream came to pass. Okay? That may seem like a long time, but throughout that journey, the salvation of the remaining 70, the extinction of the Jewish people, and the extinction of the line of Jesus was preserved so that it could prosper and then go into bondage of 400 years of slavery to come out the other side a nation. So from 70 to 2 million over a 430-year period. Okay?
Right.
That was all God's doing. Man had absolutely no part to play in the orchestration of that entire scenario to secure the seed line of the Messiah, to make sure that there was enough of a nation of Israel and there was enough of the line of Judah to be able to facilitate and to bring and use Tamar and Rahab and Ruth, 3 non-Jewish women in the line of Jesus. Rahab, who keeps getting promoted out as Rahab the prostitute, happens to be Boaz's mother. Let's put her in a rightful position as in the line of Messiah and the one that everybody says, oh, I'm waiting for my Boaz. Okay, so you want a mother-in-law who's a prostitute. If you keep on pitching her as Rahab the prostitute, that's exactly what you're asking for, and you might as well go look for a prostitute that has a kid, because that's what you're setting yourself up for. If you don't see the grace of God, you don't see the compassion of God, you don't see how God orchestrates in a way that's not natural. It is supernatural. It's not sensational like your TV evangelism. It's supernatural. And when we finally take that burden off ourselves of having to perform a certain way and to assist God in the deliverance of this, if He promises you, then He's responsible for the promise and the fulfillment of the promise. Your job is show up. That's all you have to do. Be faithful
and what you're saying, I'm preaching through the book of Galatians right now, and Paul talks about this 430 years, and you've got the law comes to Moses, but the promise was given to Abraham. And the law doesn't now change the game in such a way that God is saying, actually, I need your performance. The law is the guardian, right? And the promise still stands. And the promise, as you say, is completely on God. When God establishes that covenant with Abraham and then reestablishes it in Genesis chapter 15, it's only God that walks between the halves of the animal in the form of the smoking pot. And in essence saying, this covenant stands solely on my promise. You, Abraham, don't have to do anything. You simply show up and believe, and I will deliver on the promise. And that's at the heart of the lament, right? The lament is the cry of God saying, you ultimately are responsible for my restoration and my salvation. And I'm waiting for that. I'm trusting in your goodness. I'm trusting in your promises, knowing that ultimately you're responsible. And so all of this is happening around me that I can see with my eyes. But I'm going to trust that you're going to step in some way, in only the way that you can.
I can't see a way, but I know the way. And that's completely different. That's, Lord, I'm in this situation, I'm in this jam, I'm jammed up, I can't see a way out, but I know that Jesus said that He is the way. And so I know He's the way out. I just don't know anything to do but to grab a hold of the hem of His garment, the smallest piece of fringe hanging down closest to the ground. I'm going to grab a hold of this little thread. Okay, it's just a thread. The fringe, the hem of the garment was just the fringe of His prayer shawl, of His tallit, the fringe. This one little strand of material is what I'm going to hold on to. I'm not wrapping my arms around, I'm not bear hugging, but I'm just holding on to the bare thread. And yet my deliverance will come as long as I hold on just this much with tweezers. Yes. Not with my whole being, not with all my faith, not with all this. God's not asking us for all of that. He's just saying, hold on. Faith is small as a mustard seed. This is all you have to do, and I'll do the rest. This is that subtitle of your book, When Life's Overwhelming Pain Meets God's Overcoming Grace. That's exactly what that is in that perfect picture. So when you wrapped up this book and you sat back and you took a breath and you put the final period and you were getting ready to send it off, what was it that spoke to you that then you wanted to speak to others?
I think the thing that jumped out to me, and I talk about this in the last chapter, is because in the last chapter I talk about the adopting our daughter, and our adoption in Christ as sons and daughters, our position as heirs to the inheritance. And as we were just talking about, that's not based on my performance. It doesn't depend on me white knuckling my way through the different scenarios, but it's simply to rest in the fact that I have been baptized with Christ. I have, and then therefore I share in His death. And so I can go through sufferings, I can go through difficulty, I can go through these things, but I'm also going to share with His inheritance, which is the eternal life, and that I will rise again. And so for me, like, that's a grace that's more than I can handle. That's a wonder that causes me a wonder and a mystery that causes me just to be astonished that God would adopt me as His son and would clothe me with the inheritance of Christ. And so for me, that's that was a security that really spoke to me. And again, that's something that I hope we share with others. But for me, that's what I keep coming back to. I'm an adopted son. That is my identity. That is my hope. That is my salvation.
Well, it is a compelling story, and the book is More Than You Can Handle: When Life's Overwhelming Pain Meets God's Overcoming Grace by Nate Pyle. You've heard the expression, God won't give you more than you can handle, but God always will give you more than you can handle on your own. That's why He's God, because He's calling you to trust in Him. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says to trust in the Lord and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths or make your paths straight, or whatever translation you want to grab a hold of. It says that alone you can't handle it, but with Him, through His grace, through His mercy, through His loving kindness, through His Word, through His promised Son, through the sacrifice, through the shed blood poured out for you, you can endure all things, because God loved you so much that He sent His only begotten Son. And this plan of your life that He orchestrates takes you through the peaks and the valleys, and at your lowest point, God is right there, and you are in the most fertile place on earth, because the valley is more fertile than the mountaintop. And the valley is rich with water and lush with food, so you can survive in comfort in the most uncomfortable parts, because God will never leave you or forsake you. That's His promise to you. And that's the promise you find in More Than You Can Handle. That with God, all things are possible, and your solution is right there by grabbing a hold of the one whose hands are scarred for you, and He will lead you out. It may not feel good, it may not look like you want it to, but God and you make a majority. And if God is for you, who can be against you? Nate Pyle, thank you for sharing this incredible message with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you for having me on. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it.
God bless you, my friend. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.